Hello everyone, tonight we are following the croak of something ancient through the darkest roots of time past the bones and into the breath. You're somewhere soft, maybe a swamp, maybe not a place meant for humans, and something is singing. It's not a pretty song. It's old. It's damp. It's probably trying to attract a mate or ward off something with too many teeth. Either way, you probably won't survive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here, and drop your location and your local time in the comments so we know who else is listening to the dark with us tonight. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You're crouched at the edge of a pond, but the pond is 270 million years old. The trees are wrong, tall, barked like corrugated towers with no flowers, no fruit, and no birdsong. But there's something else, something calling. It's not quite a bird, not quite an insect. It pulses through your ribs, through your toes, through the soft clay under your feet. This isn't the first sound, but it might be the first song. Frogs didn't start off as great singers. They began awkwardly, jawbones, too stiff lungs, too busy staying inflated to think about music. But somewhere in the long, wet stretches of the Carboniferous and early Permian periods, amphibians began to experiment. Vocal sacs formed from folds of skin, tiny air pockets that could bounce sound back and forth like a damp drum kit behind the throat. It probably didn't happen all at once. Evolution rarely throws a full karaoke machine at a new species. What we think of as a frog call might have started as something much more practical, a threat, a warning to rivals, a simple low-frequency grunt that vibrated through flooded roots and up the legs of potential competitors. Over time, those vibrations became invitations. Come here, find me. This puddle is warm. This log is mine. Historians still debate whether the first true frog calls were meant for mates or enemies. There's something beautifully tragic in that uncertainty. The fossil record isn't generous to soft tissue, but in Brazil's Permian layers, paleontologists unearthed Gerobatrachus hawtoni, an amphibian that had a mix of salamander and frog features. Not quite a frog, not quite a toad, but something in between. Its hyoid bone, the same one that anchors your own tongue, was unusually shaped as if preparing to anchor something resonant. A future voice. Now, here's the weird part. Some frog vocal sacs aren't visible at all. They inflate like ghost balloons popping out of nowhere, disappearing as fast as they arrive. Some paleontologists speculate that early amphibians might have had subdermal vocal chambers, little inflatable pouches under the jaw that never showed up in the fossil record, but made all the difference. So imagine it, you're a nocturnal predator slithering through ferns taller than a man. You hear a bloop, then another, then a rising trill like wet fingers on glass. Something is singing, something small and nervous. You stop. The forest doesn't. This is the power of the call. A sound that risks everything just to be heard. Let's take a moment to appreciate the absurdity of that. Frogs essentially evolved built-in bagpipes so they could be slightly louder than the swamp they lived in. And this wasn't optional. If you didn't sing, you didn't mate. If you didn't mate, you disappeared. Singing wasn't art. It was legacy. And yet, singing also got you killed. There's a running joke in herpetology circles that the most seductive frogs are also the most murdered. Their voices carry, their bodies don't. So if you were a frog in the dark, inflating your throat like a damp balloon just to say, hey, you were also telling the entire ecosystem where you were. It's like texting you up and sending your GPS coordinates to every serial killer in town. Still, it worked. They kept singing. Amphibians have always been the stubborn romantics of the animal kingdom. Some frogs in modern rainforests inflate vocal sacs so large they obscure their own vision. Others adjust pitch depending on how much background noise the forest is making. And a few unlucky species like the critically endangered Echnomyohyla raborum were known to sing even when there were no mates left to hear them. You're still crouched at the pond. Your ankles are numb. One frog, small rust-colored eyes like polished seed pearls, bloats its throat and lets out a call that seems to echo longer than it should. It sounds like someone dragging their finger around the rim of a wine glass. That's not romantic. That's weird. You love it. Oh, and fun fact, some species of frogs can hear with their lungs. Yes, their lungs. Tiny pressure-sensitive inner linings that pick up vibrations translate them into information. So when the first frogs began to sing, they might have also been developing a second way of listening, like nature accidentally hit duet mode. So maybe the earliest frog calls weren't just sounds, they were loops. Signals sent and received in a chorus of semi-blind, damp little survivors half submerged in water, half buried in evolutionary confusion. Somewhere along the line, sound became strategy. The night didn't get any quieter. It just got more interesting. You're still at the edge of that ancient pond, but now you're beginning to realize something: it's never truly quiet here. Not even close. The dark is thick, but it's not empty. It hums. It pulses. Every shadow is tuned like an instrument. Something whistles, something chirps, something much larger grunts once and moves on. This is not a gentle night. The Carboniferous period, roughly 300 million years ago, was an audio jungle. Picture Earth blanketed in vast steamy wetlands and forests with humidity that could flatten a modern hairdryer in seconds. Oxygen levels were higher than today, which didn't just make animals larger, it made them louder. Insects the size of frisbees vibrated their wings in low, droning pulses. Giant millipedes scuttled over leaf litter with 1,000 whispering feet. And somewhere in all of that, frogs were finding their voice. Why the night was so loud? Because it had to be. With vision limited and scent confused, in the damp, constant motion undergrowth, sound became the currency of survival. Everything croaked, clacked, buzzed, clicked, or belched something. The dark wasn't a void. It was a conversation. You squint into the forest and spotted a dragonfly, the length of your forearm, clattering by with wings like parchment stretched over coat hangers. That's Meganeura, one of the largest flying insects that ever lived. And it doesn't glide silently like your modern mosquitoes. It howls through the air like a vinyl record being played backwards on a wind tunnel. Frogs could not afford to whisper. Historians still debate whether frogs responded to this acoustic chaos by matching it, syncing with it, or deliberately singing in gaps between pulses. The term for this strategy is acoustic niche partitioning. Basically, don't shout over your neighbors if you want to be heard. Some modern frogs still use this method, waiting patiently for a lull in the rainforest's hum before chiming in like anxious open mic poets. But some ancient frogs, they competed. There's evidence that certain frog-like species from this era had unusually large laryngeal structures for their size, bone markings that suggest powerful musculature and cartilage, support for loud, resonant croaks. These weren't shy creatures. These were swamp opera singers, and sometimes they won. A particularly dense frog colony singing in overlapping waves could effectively dominate a wetland. Their calls might have masked the sounds of predators sneaking up or disoriented rivals trying to find a mate. Sound wasn't just survival, it was territory. You hear it now, a rolling, pulsating rhythm, left to right, then back again. Dozens, maybe hundreds of little voices layered in irregular bursts like rain tapping on metal drums. A sudden shift, everyone goes silent. One solitary note quivers in the middle of the hush, and just like that, the chorus crashes back in. Joke break. If frogs had access to Spotify in the Carboniferous, it'd be 100% Swamp Wave Croakcore edition. Zero ads, just vibes. The loudest frog ever measured in the modern era is the Puerto Rican coqui, which can reach over 100 decibels, about as loud as a chainsaw. Now imagine hundreds of prehistoric equivalents emboldened by oxygen-rich air and no need to hold back. We're talking about nightly sound storms that probably sent ripples through pond water, rattled hollow trunks, and made it almost impossible for smaller predators to track prey by hearing alone. Of course, this came with a catch. The same oxygen-rich environment that helped amplify calls also meant bigger predators. Amphibians weren't the only ones getting experimental with evolution. Early reptiles, those ambitious little cold-blooded lizards with dreams of dry land, were emerging. They didn't sing, but they did listen. Well, and not all of them walked. Some slithered. You freeze when you hear it, not a call but a pause. An eerie, anticipatory silence between notes. The frogs are still there, but they're holding their breath. The forest has inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Something is out there. It doesn't call. It doesn't need to. It knows the frogs will do the talking for it. Modern research suggests that predators like snakes and nocturnal mammals can home in on frog calls with disturbing precision. There's even evidence that some bats, like the fringe-lipped bat, can distinguish between healthy frog calls and those of tired or injured individuals swooping in for the easiest targets. We don't have direct fossil evidence of this behavior in the Carboniferous, but we do have fossilized trackways, long looping trails of limbs and bellies, through mud that end right at pond edges, right where the sound would have been loudest. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the loudest frogs were also the last to see the sky. You notice a flicker of light. Fireflies. Not quite. Bioluminescent fungi cling to rotting trunks and fallen branches. Their glow is weak but steady. Now and then something hops near them and vanishes. It's oddly beautiful, this prehistoric light show. But nothing's dancing for joy. This isn't romance. This is routine. A nightly ritual of noise. Not because anyone wants to, but because they have to. Odd fact break. Some modern frogs use their toes to flash messages in low light, waving them like little flags in mating dances. The term for this is foot flagging, and it's weirdly charming. It's unclear whether early frogs did this too, but the motion might have helped displace scents or signal safety zones and all that chaotic murk. Your feet are wet now. The water creeps up like it's listening. You try not to move. The frogs don't care. They're singing because the night demands it. Because silence is suspicious. Because somewhere deep in their soft tissue memory, they know that if they stop, the predators win. And if they never start, they'll vanish without a trace. You shift slightly. Something tiny jumps from a reed to your foot. Pauses, croaks once, and hops away. A small defiance in a very loud night. The moon wasn't always friendly. You look up expecting comfort. Something soft and distant to reflect on while frogs do their endless gossip around you. But the sky above the ancient pond doesn't give you that. The moon hangs lower than it should. Larger. Too close. Its light hits the water with a brightness that doesn't feel natural, not yet. It wasn't always this bright, and the creatures here are still getting used to it. See, back then the moon was slowly drifting away from Earth, an ongoing celestial breakup still happening right now. It used to hover much closer. That means stronger tides, brighter nights, louder echoes. And louder meant riskier. Some historians argue that the earliest frog calls weren't just about mating or marking territory, they were timed, based on moon phases. A swelling chorus when the moon was dark. Quiet muttering under full light. The idea: don't sing when your predator can see your throat bulge. Don't belt out your best love song when your skin glistens like a snack under silver beams. Historians still debate whether early frogs could truly track lunar cycles, or if it was just generational trauma. Moonlight equals death. Even modern frogs like the Tungara frog tend to reduce calls under a full moon, possibly because bats have an easier time spotting them. So the idea that ancient frogs may have been born moonshy isn't completely out there. You glance around the pond now, tinted in a ghostly whitewash. The trees don't cast clear shadows, they blur like old film. And the frogs. Some have gone quiet. Others seem to modulate like they're testing how far their voice carries tonight. One lets out a call so low and short it almost sounds like an accidental cough. They're not performing, they're calculating. The joke here, if frogs invented jazz, this is it. Improvised, syncopated, deeply paranoid jazz. Welcome to Swamp Noir. But here's the truly weird twist: some frogs seem to have leaned into moonlight. A 2020 study of modern species like the Hyla versicolor gray tree frog found that under full moonlight, certain individuals actually called more, not less. The theory: they were compensating for the increased visual exposure with bolder acoustics, figuring, well, if I'm going to get eaten, might as well make it worth it. Imagine being the frog equivalent of that friend who insists on karaoke even when they've got the flu. Brave, foolish, weirdly inspiring. The forest around you seems to tense. Not visibly, just atmospherically. The sort of tension that happens when all the predators wake up at once but none of them strike. Yet, the frogs shift again. Some hide under logs. Some stay frozen mid-hop. And a few bold ones climb reeds and sing louder, almost like bait. You remember from earlier, this wasn't a quiet night to begin with, but something about this moon feels like it's testing them, like it's waiting to see who cracks first. There's a snapping sound to your left. Not close, but not far either. You freeze. Every frog nearby croaks once, then falls silent. Total shutdown, like they're pulling a security alarm that only they can hear. And then seconds later, one voice picks up again. It's different this time. A slow, trembly trill. Deliberate. Almost theatrical. You peer through the reeds. The frog making this sound is bright, unusually patterned, and standing still in the open. Bold move. This is a survival strategy known today as predator confusion display. The idea sings so boldly, so openly, that multiple predators target you at once, then scatter when they realize they were tricked into fighting over one bite. The singer hopes at least one attacker misses. Effective sometimes, desperate always. Scientists still don't fully understand how ancient amphibians balance this suicidal bravery with actual survival. Maybe they didn't. Maybe that's why certain species vanished. Speaking of desperation, modern frogs aren't immune to moon confusion either. In city environments where artificial light mimics moonlight, some frog species have started calling all night, every night. They're being tricked into overexposure, burning themselves out while nobody's listening. It's both heartbreaking and weirdly poetic. Imagine singing your guts out to a fake sky. You lean back slightly. Something damp drips on your shoulder. A leaf numb. A frog. It landed, paused, and is now crawling up your arm like it owns the place. It inflates its throat once very gently and lets out a chirp that seems meant for you. It's not loud, it's not showy, but it vibrates through your skin like a nervous question. What do you say to that? The truth is, ancient frogs were improvisers. They didn't have massive claws, they didn't fly, they didn't even have decent teeth, but they had sound. And sometimes the courage to use it under an enemy spotlight. There's something darkly admirable about that. Singing under a moon that might kill you, broadcasting your location in a forest full of murder just to maybe get a kiss. It's reckless. It's beautiful. Odd fact break. The waxy monkey tree frog can control its water loss and body temperature through skin secretions, essentially choosing how moist it wants to be depending on the environment. Some scientists think ancient frogs may have had similar tricks to survive cool, moonlit nights. So next time someone says they're chill, remind them frogs literally pioneered that vibe. The moon shifts again. A cloud drifts across it like a whisper. The brightness softens. Shadows reappear, and like a faucet opening, the calls start again. Frogs don't trust the sky. They never did, but they've learned how to live with it, to answer it, to outsing it. Even when it glows like an open eye. You crouch deeper into the mud now, your elbows brushing wet ferns as you peer into the trembling water. Something about this moment feels wrong, not threatening, just impossible. The frogs are still singing, you still hear them, but then you see the bones. They're half buried in a cracked rock slab near the edge of the pond where ancient sediment hardened into memory. The stone's been split recently, maybe by a tree root, maybe by something with claws, and inside a throat, a fossilized throat. Okay, not the full thing, not in soft tissue, but enough to make your brain itch. Enough to make a paleontologist cancel their vacation. This is the part where things start to get unlikely. Most people think of fossils as bones, hard things, teeth, claws, skulls grinning through time. But now and then conditions align just right. Pressure mineral, content microbial activity, and soft tissue leaves behind a ghost, a smear, a whisper of what once pulsed with blood or air. And here you're looking at the ghost of a frog's vocal sac. It shouldn't be here. Vocal sacs are just stretchy skin like a balloon someone forgot to tie off. They shouldn't survive past dinner, let alone 250 million years. But there it is, etched like a negative into the stone. Not glowing, not dramatic, just quietly there. It curves under the jawbone like a second thought. And this fossil isn't alone. In northeastern China, within the famed G-hole biota, scientists have uncovered astonishingly preserved frogs from the early Cretaceous, their outlines faintly showing vocal anatomy. These weren't generic frog blobs. These were species with distinct throat shapes, hinting at different acoustic ranges, some possibly deep and rumbly, others sharp and rhythmic. Historians still debate whether these structures definitely confirm vocal sacs, but some argue that their consistent placement and symmetry strongly suggest purposeful sound organs. Meanwhile, your frog friend on your shoulder lets out a tiny belch as if claiming victory for his ancestors. Let's pause for a moment and appreciate the absurdity. Frogs are the only animals whose throat bags might fossilize by accident just because they inflated them at the wrong time in the wrong swamp. That's like leaving behind a fossil of your sneeze. And this brings us to the most haunting part: some fossils might still hold the impression of sound. How? Through bone architecture. The structure of the hyoid bone in particular offers clues. In living frogs, the hyoid supports both the tongue and the vocal sac. In fossils, variations in this bone suggest different sound-producing strategies. There's even a bizarre hypothesis in paleontology. Circles, half joke, half thought experiment, that if you mapped enough fossil hyoids in 3D and modeled their air resonance, you could reconstruct ancient frog songs, basically Jurassic Park, but instead of dinosaurs roaring, it's just a lot of confused croaking. And if that isn't a cursed symphony waiting to happen, I don't know what is. Odd fact time: scientists once recreated the call of a 3,000-year-old mummified bird from ancient Egypt by 3D printing its vocal tract. The result: a single honking meh, a noise so underwhelming it became an internet meme. If we ever do this with frogs, prepare to be serenaded by the sound of ancient disappointment. Back at the pond, you crouch closer to the fossil. Something about it feels recent, as though the rock didn't form around it millions of years ago, but just yesterday, as the frog called one last time and sank into memory. It's not how time works, but you still feel it. There's a shadow nearby, something quadrupedal, low-slung with patient breath. You don't move. Neither do the frogs. The moon hasn't come back yet, so the night is safe. And still, that impossible fossil glows in your mind. Here's another eerie twist: some of the best preserved vocal-related fossils have been found in places that were once ash-covered wetlands choked by volcanic eruptions or sudden mudslides. Catastrophes that instantly buried everything. That's why we get soft tissue. The end of the world again and again, saved just enough to remind us what voices used to sound like. It's strangely comforting to know that some of the earliest frog calls, desperate, rhythmic, hopeful, might still be inside the earth, waiting, like echoes in a sealed jar. And while we're being haunted, let's talk about one infamous fossil that probably wasn't a frog but still makes scientists lose sleep. Discovered in a Permian outcrop in Germany, a strange amphibian fossil long thought to be a mundane creature was found with a curious thin arc under its jaw. At first, they thought it was damage, but further studies suggested it could have been the outline of a throat sac. The problem: this creature didn't belong to any known frog lineage. It was a parallel evolution, a mimic, something that for a brief flash in time also decided to sing. No one knows what happened to it. Maybe it was outcompeted. Maybe its songs were the wrong pitch. Maybe it attracted the wrong lovers. Or maybe it never stopped singing but nothing could hear it anymore. The frogs around you shift. A few hop closer to the fossil, then veer away like it smells of storm. One, slightly larger than the others, plops directly onto the stone and lets out a long, slow trill. A tribute, a warning. You're not sure. But in that moment you realize this isn't just a fossil. It's a note. A final syllable from a song that started before mammals, before flowers, before birds. It never ended. You hear it before you see it. A shift in rhythm. A hesitation. Somewhere in the dark, a singer cuts off mid-note and doesn't start again. Not a fading call, not a pause. A full surgical silence. The kind of silence that doesn't belong in a swamp like this. You stay still. The frogs do too. Something is hunting. You can feel it behind the reeds. You can't see it yet, but the air knows. The vibration changes. The way the trees drip feels slower. Even the insects hesitate to click their wings. It's not fear, it's protocol. You're not looking at a predator that rushes or roars. This one listens. Scientists once reconstructed the ecological role of early amphibian and reptilian predators in swampy nocturnal environments, and what emerged wasn't just a tale of claws and teeth. It was a war of sound. Many ancient hunters like Captorinus or Samoria weren't built for speed. They were built for patience. Short legs, broad heads, eyes adapted to low light, and crucially, ears. Historians still debate whether some of these early tetrapods had specialized hearing or simply sensitive vibration detection through the ground. But what's becoming clearer is that sound wasn't just ambient background, it was bait. You finally see it, low to the ground. Scales like melted bark. A long, sinuous neck ending in a blunt snout, nostrils, wide, barely flaring. It steps forward slowly, like it's tasting the soil through its feet. One of its eyes turns toward a cluster of frogs. It's not going for the loudest one. It's going for the second loudest. Why? Because the loudest call might be a bluff or a group, but the one trying not to be noticed, that's dinner. This strategy isn't fiction. Modern predators like the fringe-lipped bat target frogs by triangulating their calls. In fact, the bat can even distinguish between male frogs and mimicry devices. Some frogs call near puddles to enhance resonance, and the bat adjusts for that. It's like your dinner adjusting its seasoning mid-sprint. Back in your prehistoric swamp, the predator pauses again. One frog, emboldened by silence, lets out a call that sounds like a sneaky little whistle snort. The predator turns, opens its mouth, and nothing happens. It's not a lunge. It's a ripple. The ground flexes slightly, and suddenly the frog is gone. You blink. There's only a wet mark, a soft hiccup in time. The predator moves on its belly, almost scraping the ferns, leaving behind nothing but questions. Did it use suction? Did it trigger a reflex? Did the frog just stop existing? Let's not dwell. What matters is this: frogs were learning. Every hunt like that shaped them, changed their calls, adjusted their rhythms. The calls that got caught didn't make it to the next generation. The calls that escaped the offbeat ones, the slurred ones, the near-silent ones, they evolved. You hear those survivors now? Some frogs don't croak anymore. They chirp. Some trill. Some click their tongues like tap dancers underwater. The diversity is astonishing even in modern times. And some of that came directly from predators who knew how to listen. We often imagine evolution as a contest of strength or beauty. But here it was a contest of timing, of pitch, of silence. Odd fact break. The concave-eared torrent frog native to China holds the record for the highest-pitched frog call, nearly 130 decibels at 5.4 kHz. That's the pitch of a whistle, and yes, it's painful to hear up close. Scientists believe this adaptation helps its call cut through the roar of fast-moving water. But it might also have evolved as a defense. Most predators simply can't locate it. So what if one of these ancient frog ancestors figured that out first? Imagine a frog who sings so sharply, so specifically, that the predator hears it but can't find it. A living sonic ghost. Now flip it. What if a predator evolved just to find that ghost? You look down. A ripple crosses the pond. No movement. Just sound. Then another. You realize it's footsteps under the water. Something is approaching that doesn't need to see or smell. It's following a rhythm. You think of how humans follow footsteps in the dark, counting creaks in the hallway. Same principle. And just when you think the frogs will fall silent again, something bizarre happens. They harmonize. Not perfectly, not like a choir, but in a sudden coordinated wave, dozens of calls burst out at once. Some high, some low, some delayed by a breath. The result is cacophony, a deliberate chaos. It's not fear, it's strategy. This behavior has been observed in modern frog species like the green tree frog, which time their calls to avoid overlap, but occasionally erupt in synchronized choruses. The purpose: confuse predators. If you can't pick a single note, you can't pick a single target. And that's what you're hearing now. The predator stops, hesitates, it listens. But there's nothing to follow. The calls are bouncing off trees, mud, water, your ribcage. It's all noise and no location. Then slowly, the predator turns and slips back into the underbrush. The frogs, they wait, and then one by one return to their solo acts. The night resets. You laugh, not loud, just enough to fog the air, because you realize this is the oldest party trick in history. A sound so overwhelming it erases the predator's mind. Sonic camouflage. Swamp disco. You lean back and listen. Somewhere out there, another hunter is learning. And somewhere closer, another frog is tuning its throat like a broken wind instrument, preparing for the next audition in the theater of survival. You don't notice the fog at first. It just appears quiet, soft, curling between tree trunks like someone poured milk into the forest. A few frogs stop calling, but most keep going. Their voices slide through the fog like strings being plucked in slow motion. You can't see more than a few feet in any direction now, but the sound stretches for miles. And that's when you hear it, not just one frog, not even a few dozen. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Layered, rhythmic, rising. A swamp choir. There's no conductor, no timing sheet, no warm-up scale, just a kind of ritual. One frog starts its voice scratchy and unsure. Another follows stronger. Then 10 more, each joining in like it's the only thing keeping them from disappearing. The sound rolls through the wetland in waves, each pocket of frogs adding their pulse like tribal drums in a very sweaty amphitheater. This is the chorus technique. It's not just for fun. Many modern frog species do this. Eleutherodactylus rana boana. It's a survival strategy and a dating app in one. Sing together, and your odds of being heard and not eaten skyrocket. The predator might find a frog, but not you. And as a bonus, your love song has backup vocals. Historians still debate whether the earliest frogs consciously coordinated their calls, or if it was purely reactive, a biological loop responding to noise like an echo. But one thing's clear, the species that sang together lasted. You squint through the fog. It shimmers not from moonlight but from breath. Frog breath. The sheer humidity of it. The air smells like wet leaves and memory. You take a cautious step forward, your foot sinking into something half moss, half sponge. Something moves beneath the surface, probably a log. Probably. A few frogs scatter as you pass, but the chorus doesn't break. If anything, it gets louder. A trill rises to your right, a guttural thrum from your left. Insects join in. Something bird-like, not a bird, not yet screeches once and falls silent. Then the rhythm changes. It's subtle, less noise, more pattern. One frog lets out 4 quick chirps in succession. Another answers with 3, then 5, then one long drawn-out note. It doesn't sound like conversation. It sounds like code. Modern researchers have documented similar call-and-response patterns in some chorus frogs, where individuals use staggered pulses to avoid overlap, but what you're hearing now isn't avoiding overlap, it's using it. It's as if they're deliberately layering sound into something more complex. Odd fact. Some modern frogs can actually detect the number of pulses in a competitor's call and judge their size and health based on rhythm alone. It's the original talent show judged entirely by beat precision and lung power. Which brings us to the main event. You reach a clearing where the fog is thinner and the water clearer. It's a flooded meadow ringed by tall club moss and fern towers. And in the center, a mass gathering of frogs each perched on a branch or rock or floating vegetation all facing inward like a cult that forgot the robes. They're singing in waves. You feel it more than you hear it. A vibration that moves through your knees, your fingertips, the back of your skull. It's not just pitch, it's timing. Each note is a heartbeat in a creature that's learned to survive not by hiding, but by overwhelming. A predator nearby. Good. Let's give it 100 signals. One of the smaller frogs hops to a higher perch and unleashes a shrill extended bleat that echoes off the canopy. A few frogs around it stop and tilt their heads like offended critics. But then they join in matching the note, amplifying it, mutating it. It becomes something else entirely, a shriek-turned-drone-turned lullaby. You almost fall asleep standing there. The idea that frogs could develop ritualized group calls isn't new. Some species today, like the African reed frog, perform nightly vocal displays in loose synchrony, especially during mating seasons. But what if it started earlier? What if the earliest fog-thick swamps were full of choirs, not individuals? Imagine it not as music, but as signal architecture. A sonic cathedral raised each night held together by instinct and gunk. And it worked. You notice something strange, less predation here. Fewer ripples, less tension. It's not safe, but it's ordered. The fog might play a role too. Fog is great for sound travel, but bad for pinpointing direction. So every note blends into every other, and the predator just ends up chasing ghosts. You sit on a rock, careful not to sit on a frog. One lands beside you anyway. It croaks once, then stares as if waiting for your harmony. You don't sing, you just listen. And then the fog shifts again. Another colony joins in from the far side of the wetland. Their calls are different, shorter, more percussive. But they sync, somehow, across the bog, as if the two choirs have done this before. What you're hearing is temporal patterning, a theory suggesting that some amphibians evolved internal clocks, primitive ones, to align their calls with neighboring groups. Modern frogs show signs of this. Why not ancient ones? And why stop there? Some scientists suggest that overlapping frog choruses might have served as auditory anchors for entire ecosystems. In other words, frogs didn't just sing to each other, they kept time for everyone else. Like old towns with church bells marking the hour, frog calls may have signaled dusk rain danger or mating cycles for other creatures. So when frogs sang, the swamp listened. You're hearing that now. The chorus shifts one last time. Slows, deepens, as if they've hit the final refrain of tonight's performance. You feel the water still, the leaves calm, the insects hush, and then just as easily as it began, the choir dissolves. No applause, no bows, just a return to the murmur of the forest. You stand there in the hush, the echo still tickling your ears. Somewhere, one frog lets out a rogue bloop. Too late, missed the show. Classic. You smile, because this isn't the end. It happens every night. Not all frogs were joiners. You wouldn't know it from the wall of sound still ringing in your bones, but just beyond that chorus, outside the reach of the great swamp choirs. Some frogs made a different choice. They didn't sing in unison. They didn't time their calls. They didn't harmonize. They sang alone. You wade into a quieter corner of the wetland now. The reeds grow taller here, and the air is thick with moss and still water. No fog, no rhythm, just scattered echoes. The occasional solo trill breaks through the silence, sharp, uncertain, like someone testing a microphone in an empty concert hall. These are the loners. Even today, certain frog species avoid group choruses altogether. They're ambush callers, intermittent vocalizers. Their strategy: stand out by being the only voice, not one of many. In places where frog populations are sparse or competition is intense, these rogue vocalists develop unique calls, higher pitches, odd rhythms, unpredictable gaps. Some are barely more than a whisper. Others, well, they sound like a hiccup wrapped in static. Historians still debate whether solitary singing evolved from necessity or personality. Was it environmental pressure? A weird mutation? Or did some frogs just vibe differently? The loners you hear now don't seem shy. In fact, they're loud for their size. One lets out a sound like a squeaky hinge wrapped in honey. Another chirps 3 times and jumps to a new log like it's dropped the hottest mixtape of 248 million BC. But these rebels, these soloists, they didn't always win. Evolution isn't kind to uniqueness unless it comes with a survival edge. And calling alone, it's risky. Without the shield of the crowd, predators can track you by pitch, by rhythm, even by the reflection of your throat sac in moonlight. And yet, they tried, again and again. Lineages rose and fell around this strategy. Some became distinct species, others vanished. Their songs, brief and unrecorded, disappeared like coughs in a cathedral. You crouch beside one now, a small, flat-bodied creature with mottled skin and strange toes. It sees you, doesn't flinch, inflates its throat. The call is so high-pitched it makes your ears twitch. It echoes once, twice, then nothing. And that's when you feel it, a ripple. Something approaching, not fast, not loud, but deliberate. The frog doesn't run. It sings again. Some scientists think solitary frogs may have evolved alternative defenses, poisonous skin, cryptic coloration, or even sonic illusions where the sound they produce bounces in ways that mislead predators. Certain modern frogs, like the Brachycephalus, use super high-frequency chirps that only travel short distances, making them hard to locate. But for some prehistoric loners, these tricks weren't enough. Odd fact. In Madagascar, there's a species of frog, Stumphia, that's only about 10 millimeters long. It sings alone, very softly, and no one knows why it's not extinct yet. Possibly because even the predators can't believe it's real. You inch backward, letting the little soloist finish its routine. It's not afraid. Maybe it should be. But maybe that's the point. In a world dominated by choirs, there's a strange power in being the only voice. You wonder, did their songs sound lonely? Or did they sound proud? Did they sing for mates or for themselves? It's hard to tell now. Fossils don't preserve rhythm. They don't hum. They don't tap out verses with the tips of their phalanges. But some bones, especially in the inner ear, do suggest specialization. One fossil found in the hills of ancient India had a modified columella bone part of the frog's ear system that hinted at narrow-range frequency sensitivity. Basically, it was tuned to one sound its own. Imagine that. An entire species designed to hear nothing but its own voice. Joke break. So basically the original podcast host. But the joke ends when you remember they're all gone. This part of the swamp feels like a memorial. No echoes, No callbacks, just isolated notes vanishing into damp ferns. You imagine a million years of evolution spent fine-tuning a solo only for no one to hear it. There's something tragic about that, but also something familiar. Humans do this too. Not every voice fits the chorus. Some ideas get left behind not because they're bad, but because they were early. Wrong place, wrong time, too weird for the crowd. Maybe those frogs weren't failures. Maybe they were previews. A branch snaps. The soloist stops. You freeze. This time, no predator emerges. Just silence. And then another distant, hopeful croak. Not an answer. Just another soloist miles away. Their rhythms don't match. Their pitches don't sync. But they're calling anyway, like distant lights on different hills blinking alone but still blinking. This isn't extinction, yet it's memory, repetition, echo. You walk away slowly, not wanting to startle anything. The reeds close behind you. And from far off in the fog, the choir begins again. You don't know if the soloists will join in tomorrow, but tonight they sang. You find it by stepping on it. A sharp crunch underfoot, stone you think at first, but too brittle, too hollow. You lift your boot and kneel down in the mud, brushing away damp moss, until the shape becomes clear. It's amber, or something close to it, a fossilized resin lump, golden and cracked with age, as if the sun itself got bored one day and decided to bleed into the forest floor. But it's what's inside that makes your heart flutter just a little. Not an insect, not a leaf, but a bubble. And inside that bubble, a tiny structure of bone and cartilage so delicate it shouldn't have survived the week it died in, let alone millions of years. You tilt your head, squint. It's the remains of a juvenile frog skull jaw, ajar mouth open mid-call. The posture frozen in time, suspended in amber like a scream caught in syrup. You're looking at the fossilized moment of a croak. Or maybe it's wishful thinking. Historians still debate whether fossilized amber can trap sound-related poses with enough anatomical precision to make assumptions about behavior. But there are a few examples: frogs with throats extended, mouths wide, front toes raised as if stabilizing during a call. It's not hard evidence, but it's the closest thing we have to a prehistoric note in midair. You set the amber chunk gently back down. Around you, the swamp breathes. And then you see more. Half-submerged stones, slick with moss arranged in a way that doesn't feel accidental. Rounded shapes, shallow curves, some kind of fossilized mud mold. You crouch, wipe a line clean. They're resonance chambers. Okay, not like an auditorium. These are fossilized burrows, hollow, snail-like structures in dried mudstone. But their curvature, their diameter, their placement suggests something fascinating. They may have amplified frog calls. Some frogs today, like the Toongara frog, use puddles and hollows as acoustic tools, choosing calling sites that enhance their volume or distortion. The idea that prehistoric frogs did the same. That's not just plausible, it's likely. And some of these fossilized burrows show wear marks. Scratches, as if something climbed in again and again to sing. It's an eerie thought that the soundscape of the ancient world was partially engineered. Not with tools, but with instinct, with repetition, with mud. These frogs weren't just singing, they were building their own instruments. You imagine it: a small frog decades before the first dinosaur hatched, hopping into a shallow, spiral-shaped cavity and belting out a call so loud it rattles a centipede off a fern. And it echoes. That's the important part. Odd fact, sound travels faster and farther through wet mud than dry air. Certain frog species may have evolved to exploit this, literally vibrating the ground to send their messages to buried mates or worn-off underground rivals. And now, millions of years later, you're seeing the residue of those vibrations etched into fossilized soil. You run your hand along one of the burrows. The interior is smooth, polished by centuries of tiny bodies. There's something reverent about it, like touching the lip of an old horn. A song used to live here. A frog lets out a long, drawn-out bleat nearby, an almost mournful note, like it's calling for something it's not sure still exists. You sit down, letting the damp soak into your legs. The thought hits you, these fossils are more than bones. They're habits. They're behavioral fossils, traces of action, not just anatomy. Most fossil hunters chase teeth, skulls, jaws. But here are the after images of behavior, of repetition, of song. Somewhere in Myanmar, paleontologists uncovered a mid-Cretaceous frog encased in amber, so well preserved, its skin texture was still visible. It wasn't calling when it died, but its posture, legs, tucked throat slightly distended, suggested it had been mid-action. Some think it was about to jump. Others think it was about to sing. Again, not proof, but a possibility. And in science, possibility is often enough to keep the dig going. There's another sound now, a crackling trill like static played on a flute. It comes from just beyond the fossil chamber. You turn and spot the singer. Small, dark-skinned, unassuming, but its throat huge. Each call makes the surrounding reeds bend slightly, and its perch. A hollowed-out rib bone of something long dead and enormous. The frog chose its stage with care. You can tell. Modern frogs still do this perch strategically in skulls, shells, hollows, anything that turns up the volume. So it stands to reason ancient ones did too. Joke break. Congratulations, you're now watching the oldest known form of open mic night. Location: dinosaur ribcage. Special guest: Mr. Gurgle. You sit quietly and let the frog finish its performance. It's not showy, it's not desperate, it's just insistent. The chorus doesn't answer this time. Maybe they're listening. That's when it hits you. What if some frogs use these acoustic chambers not to be louder but to be different? A filter. A way to shape their sound so it stood out in the mess of nightly calls. Suddenly, it's not just noise, it's identity. The fossil burrows around you, each one slightly different in shape, might have offered slightly different timbres. That variation over generations could have influenced mating success, territorial behavior, even the rise of new species. Songs shaped by mud. Think about it. If early frogs chose mates by voice, and those voices were shaped by their chambers, then the architecture of the swamp itself played matchmaker. Nature as composer, time as conductor. You look out over the marsh, the fog returns, softening edges, rounding corners. But the sounds remain sharp. You listen differently now. Each note, each croak is an echo of bone, mud, resin, and instinct. A fossil in motion. A voice built on the ruins of last night's stage. And somewhere deep below in stone that used to be soft, there are still the shapes of those songs waiting to be played again. You've been listening for so long now that you almost don't notice it, the rhythm. Not the frog calls themselves. They're still wild, still weird, still bubbling up from throats that sound like wet saxophones with performance anxiety, but the pattern beneath it all. There's a beat here, a subtle circular pace, almost like the swamp itself is keeping time. One frog sings, two pause, a third joins. Then silence, then it begins again. You sit on a moss-covered stump. Don't worry, it's not sentient, and let the sound wrap around you. This isn't just noise anymore. This is structure, not music exactly, not language, but something in between. Something that makes you wonder, did frogs invent rhythm? Historians still debate whether animals understand rhythm the way humans do. But frogs, they might be closer to clockmakers than we thought. Modern research has shown that many frog species possess astonishing temporal precision. Some can time their calls to within milliseconds, adjusting for overlaps, synchronizing responses, even preempting neighbors. Male Japanese tree frogs, for instance, stagger their croaks like polite party guests, avoiding the same appetizer plate. The result? No one gets drowned out. Everyone gets heard. Now imagine that scaled back 200 million years. What if frogs didn't just survive the night, they organized it? You start to think of these calls not as desperate love songs or noisy survival tactics, but as scheduling, a primitive form of ecological timekeeping, not by the sun, not by the moon, but by throat sac. The frogs aren't just communicating with each other, They're communicating with everything else. Odd fact. In some modern rainforests, scientists have found that other species like crickets, bats, and even certain plants respond to frog chorus timing. It's not always conscious, but the effect is real. Certain vines unfurl leaves when frogs start singing. Some insects retreat. Predators stir. It's as if the entire forest takes cues from a handful of wet little sopranos. Could it have started here? You walk slowly, careful not to interrupt the beat. The forest reacts to timing in ways you don't expect. A sudden trill signals a wind gust. A deep croak warns of nearby footfalls may be yours. It's not superstition, it's rhythm-based survival. Some scientists have even proposed that early amphibian call cycles may have shaped the behavioral patterns of other species, serving as acoustic cues for dawn-dusk or seasonal change. Like natural clocks, but sticky and amphibious. Fossil evidence supports this idea in strange ways. In South America, paleontologists unearthed sediment layers showing repeated fossilized frog tracks arranged in circular clusters, almost like dance steps preserved over time. The leading theory: breeding circles. Frogs gathering at the same spot in the same sequence over and over year after year. It wasn't just a location, it was a time, a schedule. You sit back down on your mossy, definitely not sentient perch and listen again. You hear 3 short chirps followed by a longer rumble, then a pause. 3, 1, pause. 3, 1, pause. It's Morse code if Morse code was invented by a swamp. You glance at the water. Ripples form in time with the calls. You didn't imagine it. The rhythm is physical. It moves water, disturbs mud, sends vibrations through submerged roots. Anything living in the muck, fishworms, early lizards feels that signal. Maybe they don't know what it means, but they know when it happens. And maybe that's enough. You remember reading about the clapping toad, a modern species that literally smacks its hands together during calls, adding percussive rhythm to its croak. It's ridiculous. It's perfect. And it shows that amphibians aren't afraid to get creative with timekeeping. Which leads to the big speculative question: did frogs teach time to the forest? Did other animals, mammals, birds, insects build their daily rhythms not from the sun or stars, but from the frog chorus? Historians will argue about it forever. There's no clock to dig up, no fossil of a schedule, just bone and mud and guesswork. But here's the thing. Some of the earliest mammals evolved alongside these frogs. Tiny nocturnal furballs creeping through ferns in the dark, relying on anything they could to avoid extinction. They didn't have good eyesight, they didn't roar or fly, but they could listen. And if you're a terrified mouse thing huddling under a leaf in a swamp full of teeth, hearing the frogs go quiet might just be your best warning. Hearing them sing again, your sign to move. The swamp ticks on. 3, 1, pause. It's oddly calming. Joke break. You're in a prehistoric marsh being serenaded by what is essentially a living metronome with legs. Someone out there is making this a lo-fi study playlist right now. Frogs croak in D minor to keep you focused. 3-hour loop. The fog returns, not heavy this time, just a light mist. It hovers above the water like a veil. The frogs keep going unfazed. You lean into it, listening closely. 3, 1, pause. But then something strange happens. The rhythm changes. No warning, no pattern. One frog holds a note too long. Another cuts in early. A third refuses to follow. The sequence breaks. And so does the stillness. The insects go quiet. The trees lean inward. A single ripple crosses the pond and vanishes. The frogs. They start again, but slower this time. Offbeat, as if they're recalibrating, not scared, just thoughtful. You realize what happened. Something in the forest shifted. A disturbance in the ancient program. The frogs noticed. And now they're adjusting the schedule. You can't see what it was. Maybe it's a predator. Maybe it's a coming storm. Maybe it's you. But you feel it. The way you feel a missed heartbeat. The rhythm isn't gone, just changed. You sit, wait, listen. Eventually, it returns. But different now. Two, pause. Two, pause. And just like that, the clock resets. Silence. Not a pause, not a lull, not the kind of quiet where you know the frogs are just catching their breath. This is wrong silence. The kind that stretches like a snapped vine. The kind that comes after something irreversible. You crouch at the edge of the swamp, and for the first time in what feels like hours, no one is singing. The fog has lifted. The air is still. The trees, those tall, fern-plumed towers, don't sway. You'd think you wandered into a painting, one where the paint dried just after a scream. And in a way, you have. This is the after, the end of a song that lasted over 150 million years, the asteroid. Yes, that asteroid slammed into Earth roughly 66 million years ago near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. Everyone remembers the dinosaurs, the firestorms, the darkness that followed. But not everyone remembers the frogs. They were there, singing, and then they weren't. Fossil records from the late Cretaceous into the Paleogene show a stark drop in frog diversity across many regions. Some families vanished entirely. Others survived barely. It wasn't just the impact itself, it was the cascade that followed volcanic winters, acid rains, climate chaos. The chorus fractured. Whole songs went extinct. Historians still debate whether the frogs that survived did so because of their location, their breeding habits, or pure evolutionary luck. Some suggest species that buried themselves hibernators, mud sleepers, fared better. Others believe that those who stayed quiet had a better shot. You stare across the water and you can almost feel it the moment the swamp went silent. The ashes falling like confetti over lily pads, the vibrations gone, no rhythm, no countdown, just stillness. Somewhere out there a frog croaked once more, and no one answered. Odd fact. In Australia, a species called the northern gastric brooding frog went extinct in the 1980s, less than a decade after its discovery. It birthed its young through its mouth after gestating them in its stomach. A miracle of biology, gone. Just like that. Not from asteroids this time, just from us. But back then, after the real end of the world, a few frogs did hang on. And the ones that survived, they changed. You move through a patch of blackened ferns, charcoal plants turned fossil, their outlines ashy and fragile. Beneath them, the soil is disturbed. Something dug here, maybe recently, maybe 60 million years ago. Frogs. Burrowers. While the surface world was choking on dust and fire, some frogs went underground. They curled into mud, slowed their hearts, and waited. Not for weeks, for years. Modern frogs do this. It's called estivation, basically the cousin of hibernation, but for dryness, heat, and apocalypse. Some African frogs have survived 7 years underground without a drink. So it stands to reason their ancestors did something similar. Somewhere during the long dark, a frog opened its eyes underground, climbed to the surface, croaked. No answer. Croaked again. A few others stirred, and very slowly the rhythm began again. 2. Pause. 1. Pause. There's a bittersweet beauty in imagining the Earth's first post-extinction choir. It wouldn't have been loud or organized, but it would have been the first life to reclaim the night. Frogs singing to skies that no longer glowed orange. Frogs calling into forests half-melted. Frogs reinventing a world from scratch. And the swamp. It adapted too. Plants regrew. Insects rebounded. Predator niches reopened. And in the spaces where mammoths and tyrannosaurs would have walked, new frogs called for the first time. Their voices shaped by silence, not competition. You stop at a clearing filled with shallow pools. These aren't natural, they were dug. Or rather worn frog bodies rolling over the same soft places again and again. Breeding grounds reborn in ash. You kneel. Run your hand through the water. Still warm, still alive. A single frog hops across the edge and lets out a curious chirp. Not loud, but not afraid. But the survivors of the mass extinction were few. But from them came all modern frogs. Every tree frog, every dart frog, every burrowing desert weirdo with translucent skin and a diet of termites. The post-asteroid world was their blank canvas. And their songs, more cautious now, more experimental, began to shape the new night. Joke break. You think you've had a bad week? Try singing into a post-apocalyptic wasteland, hoping your soulmate didn't vaporize. Frog dating has always been high stakes. Some scientists believe the near extinction reset frog evolution in weird and wonderful ways. New call types appeared, new throat shapes, new rhythms. It was a creative explosion. Tragic origin, sure, but look at them now. Over 7,000 species, each one with its own song. You sit a while longer in the new swamp. It's quieter than the earlier choir. More hesitant. The survivors aren't rushing. And yet when they do sing, it's deliberate. Like every note is being written for the first time. You wonder, what did the first post-impact frogs remember? Was the silence encoded in their bones? Did their calls carry sorrow or just instinct? We'll never know. But you can feel it in the way the air vibrates. Not just sound anymore. History. You wake up to a sound you don't recognize. It's a chirp, but soft, uncertain, and somehow familiar. You blink, realize you've dozed off beside the pond, half-curled like a damp fossil. The swamp hasn't changed, still heavy, still rhythmic, but the voices are different now. Higher, more varied, and somewhere woven between the frog calls you hear something else. A coo, a squeak, a strange little growl that sounds suspiciously like someone's toddler trying to impersonate thunder. The mammals are awake, and they're listening. Historians still debate how mammals behaved in those early post-dinosaur nights. For millions of years, mammals were small, soft, and mostly nocturnal, stuck in the shadows, while reptiles ran the show. But once the asteroid pulled the curtain, the survivors stepped into the spotlight. And the frogs were waiting. You're crouched behind a thick trunk now, watching something absurdly fluffy crawl through a tangle of ferns. It's rodent-shaped, but lankier. Big eyes, fast feet, probably a multituberculate or an early placental mammal. Whatever it is, it's twitchy, and it pauses whenever the frogs call. Every time the swamp sings, it stops. When the frogs go quiet, it dashes. Coincidence? Maybe not. There's a growing theory among paleontologists that mammals, especially early ones, learn to navigate their world using frog calls. Not just to avoid predators, but to time their movement. Frogs, after all, were the one constant in a landscape that kept changing. The calls meant water, safety, sometimes danger, but mostly life. It's possible mammals synced their nightly foraging to the frog choruses, using them as background signals for when it was safe to move. Think of it like an ancient version of those ambient white noise machines we fall asleep to, except in this case the sound meant you probably won't die if you eat that berry. Odd fact. In some modern ecosystems, small mammals are known to pause or shift behavior in response to frog choruses. One study showed that tree shrews in Southeast Asia used amphibian calls as indirect cues for predator activity. If the frog screamed, they froze. So now, picture the scene. A newly evolved, oversized shrew thing tiptoes through the swamp. The frogs start to sing. It stops, waits. The frogs keep singing. It continues, belly low, ears perked. The frog suddenly goes silent. It drops flat. Seconds later, something slithers overhead. You watch as the multituberculate slinks beneath a fern, pauses, and bizarrely lets out a squeaky reply. Not a full call, just a sound. An echo. Could it be mimicry? There's evidence that mammals, even early ones, evolved not just to listen to sound, but to respond. Some vocalizations were alarm calls. Others were for territory mating comfort. But somewhere along the evolutionary path, a few mammals may have learned to harmonize not with each other, but with the frogs. Not perfectly, not musically, but close enough to be part of the ecosystem's acoustic architecture. And you know what that means? Frogs may have been the first choir directors. You're laughing now because the mental image is ridiculous, a toad with a baton conducting a swarm of mammals in harmony. But the reality is almost stranger. Mammals learning the tempo of the forest by ear, matching rhythms, timing movement, singing back. There are modern parallels too. Take the rock hyrax. Its calls show surprising similarities in pattern and tone to some amphibians, despite the two groups being evolutionary worlds apart. And then there's the bush baby with its eerie nighttime shrieks, suspiciously frog-like in their pacing. Coincidence? Possibly. Echoes? Definitely. You lie back in the grass, eyes on the canopy. The frogs are singing again. Steady, confident. And here and there you hear tiny mammal noises in between. Squeaks, rustles, chitters. Not in sync. Not yet. But trying. You wonder if this is where lullabies began? When early mammals started mimicking the rhythm of frogs to calm their young, signal the end of danger, or call each other back from the underbrush. You can almost hear it, a mother somewhere in the dark rocking a furless infant under a root, humming a pattern that once came from the swamp. And the infant quieting, not because the sound is beautiful, but because it's old. Because it means something. That's the difference between noise and music after all. Meaning. Frog calls were never random. They were survival messages, love letters, neighborhood gossip, danger alarms, and the mammals who listened, really listened, learned to survive. They learned to live alongside rhythm. You shift slightly, and a small frog hops onto your chest. Doesn't croak, just sits. A moment later, something rustles nearby. You freeze. A tiny mammal peeks out from the ferns. It stares at the frog. The frog croaks. The mammal chitters. They part ways, and for a moment it feels like a duet. Joke break. Somewhere deep in the fossil record, there's probably a long-lost Grammy awarded to a rodent-frog collab titled Swamp Beats Vol. 1 We Didn't Die Tonight. We. But the truth beneath the humor is this: frogs didn't just survive the end of the world. They helped shape what came next. Their calls became reference points. Their rhythms became blueprints. Their songs may have taught the first mammals how to listen, and maybe, just maybe, how to sing back. You're not sure how long you've been walking. The swamp has no clocks, and the frogs certainly aren't sharing their timekeeping secrets tonight. Their rhythm has shifted again, slower, quieter, more scattered, which should be calming, but isn't. Because something feels off. A frog calls once, and something answers, but it's not another frog. It's close. Too close. Mimicking the pitch, the spacing, the wet crackle of the real thing but not right. Like someone trying to whistle a lullaby with teeth in the wrong place. You freeze. Another call from the reeds. Same shape, same length, but again off. Like it was copied from memory after a concussion. A bootleg frog. You crouch low. This isn't just mimicry, it's lure. And frogs, for all their survival tricks, sometimes get caught in the oldest trap in the book, thinking they're talking to each other when they're talking to something that wants to eat them. Modern examples of this are rare, but terrifying. The fringe-lipped bat mentioned earlier homes in on frog calls, but there's evidence it can also mimic them. Just enough to throw off a nervous male. One syllable wrong. Just enough to say I'm a frog without adding with wings and fangs. Historians still debate whether prehistoric predators could mimic vocal patterns. We don't have fossilized throats after all, and we don't get to dig up recordings. But some suspect that early theropods, especially small agile ones like troodons, may have been auditory hunters using chirps or trills to confuse prey. Not confirmed, but possible, and if it's possible, you're not the only one who thought of it. The frogs around you are quieter now. Their calls stutter, restart, falter. One lets out a full trill, waits, hears the false reply, and goes still. There's a long pause. Then it calls again. Closer this time. You realize this is the danger of song. Once a rhythm exists, anything can copy it. You shift slowly, staying low, watching a cluster of frogs gathered near a shallow puddle. They're nervous. One inflates its throat sac, then deflates without a sound. Another lets out a quick gick, then leaps into the water. And then from the tree line, that sound again? A perfect croak. Almost. Odd fact. In 2019, researchers studying a frog population in South America noticed a strange pattern. Some frogs were responding to a non-biological noise, a repeating click from a piece of malfunctioning field equipment. Not because it sounded good, but because it sounded familiar. Pattern recognition trumps tone. So now imagine something with a brain, something patient, something that once watched a frog open its throat, heard the sound, and thought, I can do that. Predators don't always need to outrun you. Sometimes they just need to be invited. You duck behind a trunk, pressing your back to the bark. A frog hops into a hollow beside you. Its throat inflates. It croaks once, and the reply comes instantly. Not from the water, from the trees. The frog doesn't flinch. You do. You peer out, expecting wings, claws, a slinking shadow with echo-tuned ears. But there's nothing, just leaves, just mist, just the memory of a song gone sideways. Because here's the thing, frogs weren't just calling for love, or dominance, or even timing. Sometimes they were calling into the dark, hoping the thing that answered was what they expected. And sometimes it wasn't. You begin to move again, stepping carefully over moss and root. The frogs are thinner here. Their calls more fragmented. It's not silence, it's confusion, as if they're unsure whether they're still speaking frog. Then you see it. A patch of ground cleared by something large, mud churned, ferns bent. A fossilized log split neatly in half like a bench. And in the center, a frog, alive, alone, calling. And from all around the clearing, responses. Dozens, all different. None right. It keeps calling. You want to stop it. You want to whisper, hey, maybe tonight's not the night. But it inflates again, croaks again, and the answers keep coming. Too fast, too many, like echoes in a funhouse mirror. This is the downside of rhythm. It can be stolen. It's the frog's greatest strength and worst vulnerability. And it's not just about predators. Some mimicry might come from other frogs. Copycat species. Sound parasites. Animals that evolved to match the tone of more successful cousins. Blend in. Steal mates. Borrow safety. Not enemies, but not friends either. You sit in the mud watching the soloist repeat its pattern. 3 chirps. Pause. 1 long note. Answer. Again. 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 It doesn't stop, because it doesn't know it's already been answered by the wrong thing. You wonder how often this happened in the prehistoric dark. How many calls brought not love, not help, but silence, or claws? Joke break evolution gave frogs big eyes and loud mouths. Shame, it couldn't also install caller ID. There's something tragic here, but also something brave. To keep calling even when the world answers with lies. To repeat your rhythm even when no one sings it back properly. The frogs don't stop, they don't know how. Because somewhere in the mess of mimicry and echoes there might still be a real voice, a match, a mate, a reason. You leave the clearing slowly, letting the false calls fade behind you. The deeper swamp is waiting, the older songs, the purer rhythms. But before the fog takes the soloist from your view, you hear one final trill. This time no reply, just stillness. And then softly, another frog nearby repeats it. The same pattern. For the first time, a real answer. You smell it before you hear it. A dry wind moves through the swamp, rare, unexpected. It brings a scent like ash and cold stone, something from higher ground. The frogs hush just a little, not with fear but confusion. This isn't a smell that belongs here. And then comes the sound. A whistle, not a bird call. Not wind through trees. It slides across the clearing like a low flute, long, wavering, and distinctly not frog. It has a sadness to it, a metallic quality that doesn't match any throat you've heard tonight. You follow it, through twisted roots and bent cattails, stepping where the moss parts easily until the terrain changes. The mud gives way to sand, the trees thin. The water grows shallow and still like a forgotten mirror. And there, perched on a rock worn smooth by centuries of nothing, sits a frog. But not like the others. This one is pale, broad-backed. Its eyes are dull silver as if reflecting a moon that isn't currently present. Its throat inflates slowly with effort, and the sound it produces doesn't match its body. It whistles like the wind, long, low, haunting. Scientists today know that some modern frogs don't croak, chirp, or trill. A few, like the Anomaloglossus bb, produce call-like vibrations that resemble whispers or breezes. But in the fossil record, there are hints, just hints, of species with enlarged shield-like skulls and odd jaw joints that suggest a different kind of sound. Not loud, not rhythmic, but resonant. Historians still debate whether these frogs were vocal at all, or if their body shape allowed them to accidentally produce eerie, wind-like sounds while breathing or moving. Some think it was defense. Others think it was communication. A few romantics. They think it was mourning. You crouch low watching this ghost frog exhale another long note. It's not performing. It's remembering. The area around it is too dry for a swamp, too quiet. No insects buzz, no birds call. The frogs nearby, if there are any, don't sing. And yet the whistle continues. You remember reading about frogs that survived on the edge of climate collapse? Species that lived not in waterlogged paradise, but in bone-dry plateaus and volcanic margins. Their calls weren't meant to echo through lush foliage, they were meant to cut through silence. Odd fact. The desert rain frog from Namibia can emit a high-pitched squeak that's been compared to a squeaky toy. It doesn't sound threatening, but it carries. And in dry, flat environments, that's the whole point. Sometimes a strange call is better than a loud one. You step closer and the frog turns slightly, just enough to see you, but it doesn't stop. Its throat expands again, skin straining like thin paper. The next whistle rises slowly, more mournful than before. And then something else answers. A tree, not a frog, creaks in the wind. And you realize the frog's pitch matches the sway of the branches. Not mimicking, not copying. Joining. What if this species didn't learn to mimic wind, but evolved with it, not against it? What if its voice became part of the landscape? A collaboration between throat and breeze. Fossilized remains found in a high-altitude volcanic basin in South America show signs of an ancient frog species with unusually large nostril passages and oddly formed sinuses. No one quite agrees on what it means. Some think it allowed for more subtle vocalizations. Others think it was useless. But here in this empty stretch of prehistoric silence, you understand. The frog whistles again. The wind responds. Together, they make a kind of duet, no rhythm, no melody, just shared breath. You sit on the edge of a flat stone and close your eyes. The frogs in the deeper swamp are gone now, or too far to hear. This is something else, a different music. You wonder if this is what extinction sounds like, not silence, but a slow unraveling call that no one answers until the wind learns to carry it. There's beauty in it, not the kind you expect, the kind that asks nothing of you, that doesn't want applause, just witness. Joke break. Somewhere out there, a frog evolved to sound like an existential sigh, and scientists are still arguing whether it meant anything or was just nature's way of trolling acoustic biologists. But sitting here, you think it meant something. You think this frog remembers something the others forgot. Not rhythm, not mating rituals, but the feeling of being the last. You watch as it calls again. Long, low. The sound shivers across the pond and fades into the air like the scent of a fire long gone out. There are no answers. And still it sings. Because wind remembers shape. Because echo is a kind of companionship. Because even if nothing sings back, a voice is still a promise. One more whistle. One more wind. You stand and leave the frog to its duet. You've heard everything tonight. Calls that chirp, that trill, that beat like hearts on the outside. Choirs of swamp singers in perfect dissonance, mimics in the dark, ghost whistles on the wind. But now, as you move deeper into the trees, there's something else. The absence. You cross a stretch of dry, cracked ground. Not desert, just emptiness. A clearing where the water retreated, where the trees stopped growing, where even the bugs seemed to have thrown in the towel. It's not silent. But no one is calling. You hear movement. Frogs, dozens of them resting along the edges, hiding beneath leaves huddled against stones. Their throats twitch occasionally like muscle memory. But there are no sounds. Just breathing. You kneel beside one, a broad, squat creature with eyes too big for its body. It watches you, doesn't flee, doesn't sing. And that's when you understand this is the place where frogs don't call anymore. Not because they forgot, but because no one answers back. Some species today have fallen silent. Populations so small, so fragmented, that calling is no longer worth the energy. In parts of Central America, conservationists monitor frogs that haven't been heard in years. Their last known calls recorded on grainy cassette tapes kept in plastic boxes like hymns in sealed tombs. Historians still debate whether the last singers knew they were alone. You sit down careful not to disturb the stillness. The frogs here look patient, not hopeless, not desperate, just quiet. A few inflate their throats reflexively. They puff, they wait, they release nothing. The swamp has moved on. New rhythms, new singers, new beats from different biomes. But this patch, the echo-less hollow, is what remains when the choir breaks and no one shows up for rehearsal. It's hard to think about extinction this way, not as a bang, but a quiet refusal. You imagine what came before. A time when this clearing was filled with sound. Maybe it was a breeding zone. Maybe it was home to a unique lineage, a rhythm that no other species could mimic. Maybe the wind frog once whistled here. Maybe not. Either way, it's over. And yet, odd fact. In 2022, researchers recorded a frog call in a remote part of Papua New Guinea that didn't match any known species. A single call. One time. Never repeated. They're still trying to find it again. So maybe the songs aren't gone. Maybe they're just waiting. You watch as a younger frog hops closer to one of the elders. No sound, no display, just proximity. They sit together, side by side, two throats still and silent. And then, a breath. One of them inflates, just a little, lets out a single pulse of air. It doesn't resonate, it doesn't echo, but it's there. The other frog turns, responds, not with a call, but a nudge. A press of body against body. No song, just presence. Frogs have other ways of communicating. Taps, vibrations, waves, a dance of limbs and stillness. In species like the Panamanian golden frog, visual signals have replaced calls, entirely hand-waving gestures in rivers too loud for voices. So maybe the frogs here have simply adapted, not vanished, not extinct, just moved past the need for noise. You wonder if rhythm is the memory of a group. What happens when the group is gone? What survives? Joke break. Somewhere in this clearing, there's a frog who still insists they could have been a great singer if everyone else hadn't ghosted them. The others were out of tune anyway. But you don't laugh. Not here. The clearing doesn't want jokes. It wants remembrance. So you stay. Not long, just enough to witness it. Two frogs breathing side by side. Not calling. Not competing. Just existing. And that's something. Because the quiet isn't empty. It's full of what used to be. Every rustle in the leaves, every twitch of a throat sac, every breath unspent. Fossils aren't just stone. Some live in the way creatures behave after the song ends. In hesitation, in waiting, in stillness. You rise slowly, step carefully through the grass and leave the silent frogs to their invisible concert. Maybe one day they'll sing again. Maybe not. But even without a call, they're still here. The swamp doesn't sleep. It breathes. It resets. It holds its breath, but it never truly sleeps. You're walking now along a ridge where the trees grow thick and ancient, their roots tangled like old fingers, their trunks hollowed by time and whatever came before frogs. The air is cooler here, the songs softer, but still present, still singing. You realize this now, frogs never stopped. even after the ash clouds, the mimicries, the false echoes, and the forgotten rhythms. Even after no one answered, after the choirs thinned, after the soloists disappeared into sediment and myth, they kept going. Their voices have shifted, sure. Some calls are frantic and bright. Others are slow and aching like moss remembering light. But they're all connected, an unbroken line of breath and throat stretched across continents, mass extinctions, ice ages, meteor scars, and every bad decision Earth ever made about climate. They are still singing. You crouch beside a pool so dark it swallows the sky. The frogs around it glow faintly in the moonlight. Not from magic, just the shine of wet skin and the luck of placement. Their calls bounce off the water and drift up into the canopy where sleeping birds shuffle in their nests and old leaves tremble gently. This isn't a performance. It's survival. But it's more than that, too. There's no reason these frogs have to call as beautifully as they do. They could just grunt, bark, wheeze. And to be fair, some do, poorly. But others rise above the minimum, adding flourishes, extra trills, delayed endings. Why? Because even when the dark presses in from all sides, the instinct remains to be heard. Even now, scientists are discovering new frog calls. In cloud forests, in buried wetlands, in places where the nights are longer and the stars seem farther away. The voices differ, but the purpose echoes. I'm here. You are too. Let's begin. You sit. The moss is warm beneath you, or maybe your body has simply accepted the damp. Either way, you're grounded. And around you, one last chorus. This one isn't the biggest, not the most dramatic, but it's steady. Every few seconds, a new note joins. Low groans, high whistles, hiccups, clicks. Some sync, some don't. It doesn't matter. This is a world stitched together by frog song. They don't rule it, but they remember it. Odd fact. The resplendent bush frog of the Western Ghats sings so softly that its call can only be heard within a few meters. Yet it persists year after year, call after call in one of the noisiest ecosystems on Earth. That's dedication. You close your eyes. The calls weave through you now, not around you. They carry weight, not sorrow, not joy, just presence. It's easy to forget how long frogs have been here. Before mammals, before feathers, before flowers, when all the world was water and shadow, they were already learning how to shape breath into signal, and they never stopped. Joke break. Frogs have seen 5 extinction events. Global floods, volcanic winters, and humans, and still said, "Yup, still gonna vibe." You smile. Not everything ancient had to die to be respected. Some things just kept going. You rise slowly, not wanting to disturb the rhythm. The frogs don't flinch. They've seen your kind before. You're just a blip in their nightly symphony. As you walk away, the last thing you hear is a pattern. 2 notes. Pause. 3 short bursts. Then 1 long one. It doesn't mean anything. Or maybe it does. Maybe it's their version of a goodbye. You won't know. You're not a frog. But tonight you listened. And they sang. The frogs were never supposed to outlast the stars they sang under. And yet here they are, still calling, still breathing, still threading rhythm into a planet that barely remembers what came before them. Across 15 sections we wandered together through a world older than flowers and louder than extinction. We met the first frog voices, damp and trembling, that learned to weaponize breath. We watched them sing against predators, against storms, against their own disappearance. We witnessed choirs form in the fog and soloists vanish under false moons. We saw echoes carved into amber time, kept with throat sacs and lullabies that carried mammals into a future that had never heard sound before. And somehow, it was the frogs who remembered the beat, even as songs lured death, even as calls went unanswered, even as voices faded until all that remained was breath and instinct. They sang. Not for us, not even always for each other, but because the rhythm itself deserved to continue. And maybe that's the lesson tonight. That survival isn't just teeth and claws and hiding from the dark. Sometimes it's a soft noise under a heavy sky, a whistle that joins the wind, a quiet call in a clearing no one answers anymore. A song sung anyway, so sleep easy tonight. The frogs are still out there, and they're still singing at the edge of time.